Deep in the Yukon lies a gold mine no one talks about anymore. It's been sitting untouched for decades, quiet, forgotten, and left to rot. Most miners wouldn't go near it, too remote, too uncertain, too much trouble. But Tony Beets, he sees something different where others walk away. Tony digs in, because sometimes the biggest wins are hiding in places no one thinks to look. There was a stretch of ground tucked away in the Yukon that no one had touched in years, an area long dismissed as spent and worthless, but Tony Beets couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind at a time when gold prices were peaking and fuel costs had dipped just enough to tempt fate. The conditions were too perfect to ignore. Nobody had ever thought to bring an excavator into that forgotten zone. And that fact alone made it stand out. It wasn't just curiosity, it was instinct. Sharpened by decades in the field, Tony didn't need certainty. What he had was a gut feeling that the old-timers hadn't cleaned this place out as well as they thought, and that somewhere beneath the layers of gravel and time something valuable still waited. Let's rewind. Just half a mile from Tony's main operation sat an unremarkable hill, barely noticeable among the rough terrain. But this hill held history. It was one of the first sites in the Klondike to see mechanical mining. Decades ago, miners ran their operations here with the best equipment they had at the time. But that equipment was crude compared to modern standards. They only cleaned out their soul box once a year, which meant that any fine gold that slipped through was likely lost in the tailings. Massive mounds of gravel and rock, long written off his waste, could actually be hiding forgotten riches. Most dismissed it as a dead end, but Tony saw a pattern. He knew that if even a fraction of that misted gold remained, it could be worth more than anyone expected. And the more he looked at that hillside, the more convinced he became that the old-timers hadn't taken everything. Something was still there, buried, overlooked, and waiting. He brought in Kevin. He brought in the crew. And he brought one important question: what if this isn't just a pile of rocks? The answer wasn't in the stories, it was under the dirt. Tony pointed to the remains of an old wooden saw buried beneath the hill, 80 years old, maybe more, and still there. It was a whisper from the past. With no time to waste, he ordered an excavator. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. As the excavator fired up and its metal arm drove into the ground, the machine tore through compacted layers of tailings, gravel, silt, and rock that hadn't been disturbed in nearly 80 years. This wasn't just digging, it was uncovering the decisions of men long gone, chasing a dream with tools that couldn't catch everything they saw. No one knew for sure whether this ground had been bled dry or whether it still held secrets buried deep within. They panned the first bucket cautiously, not expecting much, but as the water swirled and the sediment washed away, sunlight caught something unmistakable. Flecks of gold, fine as dust, scattered through the dirt, and it wasn't isolated. It was consistent, visible in every swirl of the pan. Gold had settled into these tailings like forgotten breadcrumbs left behind by a bygone era. The crew didn't speak, but the look said it all. This wasn't just luck. This wasn't a fluke. What they had uncovered hinted at something far bigger, a silent cache of gold that had evaded capture for nearly a century. Tony had been sitting on this for over 3 decades, and now proof. Even Minnie, who usually tempers Tony's wild ideas, had to admit this was something different. Gold in nearly every pan, running straight through the material. That old hill, it wasn't junk. There weren't any leftovers. It was loaded. This was the kind of moment that could turn an entire season around. But one question remained: how much gold is really in there? You don't make big moves based on gold dust alone. Tony needed real numbers, real proof. So he cranked up the Kiwi plant, a high-efficiency wash system that could handle serious pay dirt. Monica jumped on the loader, feeding 100-yard. Desiree kept the tailings flowing. Everything was rolling until it wasn't. A sharp snap echoed across the site, followed by a harsh metallic crack that cut through the air like a warning. In an instant, the saw central to the entire operation lurched forward, grinding against its supports and twisting out of position. The plant groaned under the sudden shift, then came to a dead halt. A critical cable had snapped, and the delicate balance of the system was shattered. The structure was no longer stable. Dirt, piled where it shouldn't, water flow collapsed, and just like that, the heartbeat of the operation flatlined. This wasn't a routine breakdown with the wash plant offline. Tony was hemorrhaging up to $2,000 in lost gold every hour, and with no guarantee that the site would even pay off. Each passing minute pushed the crew closer to disaster. The risk wasn't just financial. Tony had bet big on this forgotten ground, and now with everything hanging in limbo, that gamble was beginning to look dangerously close to collapse. Tony didn't flinch the moment the plant went down. The crew kicked into overdrive. There was no time for hesitation, no room for second giving. This wasn't just a fix, it was a full-scale emergency rebuild in the middle of the Yukon wilderness. The twisted metal framework of the slough run was their first target. Bent beams had to be pulled back into position with brute force, and precision supports that had snapped clean off were welded back into place. With glowing arcs of fire, the air grew thick with the scent of scorched iron and burning oil. Sweat mixed with grime. Tools clenched, machines groaned, and still they didn't stop. One mistake, and the entire structure could fail again. But Tony didn't waver. This wasn't his first breakdown, and it wouldn't be his last. Hour after hour, they fought against the damage, the fatigue, and the clock, and finally, after 8 punishing hours, the final weld was sealed. The last bolt locked in place. The plant stood ready, battered but rebuilt just in time to find out if this entire gamble would actually pay off. The engines roared back to life, shaking off the silence that had lingered during the repair. The flow resumed, and with it came the weight, the kind that stretches time thin and makes every second feel heavier than the last. This was it. The rebuilt plant was running, the tailings were moving, and now everything hinged on what came out the other side. Tony watched closely, arms crossed, eyes fixed. Nothing in mining is guaranteed, but he gambled hard on this forgotten stretch of land. Now it was time to see if it had been worth it. 4 hours passed as the plant worked steadily, feeding the soul with the same gravel that had sat untouched for nearly a century. No one rushed, no one guessed. When it was finally time to weigh the gold, the crew gathered around in tense silence. The air was thick with anticipation. The first results came in 1.6 ounces, then 2.5, and then climbing steadily. The final weight settled at 4.20 of gold. $7,400 worth pulled from what everyone else had called waste. Tony's hunch hadn't just worked, it had revealed something far bigger. This wasn't just a decent recovery, it was a confirmation that the tailings, long dismissed and forgotten, might be the richest ground they'd seen all season. They were performing better than the current hill they'd been mining all season. Suddenly, what had started as a gamble looked more like a gold mine revival, an entire treasure trove just sitting there waiting. And Tony, he was all in. The old-timers had walked away from this place. They didn't know what they'd missed. They didn't have the tools, they didn't have the tech, but Tony Beets, he had it all, and he had the guts to go back where everyone else had given up. Most miners wouldn't even look twice at a pile of tailings. Tony, he looked 3 times, because sometimes the gold isn't where it's supposed to be, it's where nobody thought to look. Is this the end of the story? Not even close. With results like this, Tony's only just scratched the surface. What else is hiding in the dirt? What other secrets did the old miners leave behind? Only one way to find out. Keep digging, because in the Yukon, gold doesn't just disappear, it waits. And Tony Beets, he's coming for every last